Greetings, friends. My name is Michael Levine, and welcome to Without Notes, the podcast, a show dedicated to a very, very Neanderthal lost art. What lost art is it dedicated to? It's dedicated to the lost art of human conversation, elongated, long-form communication. Long-form communication in today's world means anything over 140 characters. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the antiquated belief that conversations are not meant to be outbursts done in text messages, Twitter messages, Snapchats. Those are fine for certain short-form communications, but I think there was a real human value to long-form communications, particularly when you're dialoguing with a man as fascinating as Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Now, one thing that I will not do on today's show, which is to pretend that I do not know Zuhdi Jasser. I know him, and I admire him greatly. I think he is I don't hesitate to refer to him as an American hero. I believe that 10 years from now, history will record Dr. Jasser and his movement to reform Islam to be among the more important political and social movements of our time. So with that grand introduction, I'd like to welcome Dr. Zuhdi Jasser to Without Notes, the podcast. We're going to be dialoguing with him. And we're going to start, if I may, Dr. Jasser, I'd like to start, even though I know some of the details of the story, just with a little biographical information for our audience who listens to this all over the world. Dr. Jasser, where were you born?
Well, thanks, Michael. It's always great to talk to you. And, this work not only means a lot for the importance of it, what it means to me, but it's because I get to meet people like you. So I was born in Canton, Ohio, but my family had escaped Syria a few years before that. My mom and dad had been political refugees and found an internship in Canton that my dad did until he was accepted as a legal political asylum. And then he did his training at Tulane in New Orleans, and they moved to Wisconsin when I was 4. So my memories in my childhood, I grew up in Wisconsin for the majority of my life until I graduated from medical school.
Okay. And you followed in your father's footsteps. You became a doctor. Now, you had some military service, American military service. Talk to us, if you would, introduce the audience to a little bit of your military service.
Yes, I grew up in this small town near Appleton, Wisconsin, south of Green Bay, and went to junior high and high school there and decided I wanted to be a physician. I was fast-tracked to medical school, had been accepted out of high school, and as a junior in college at the University of Wisconsin, I got accepted to medical school and decided to join the military, and I was accepted on a Navy scholarship through the Health Professions Scholarship Program, which pays for all of your education, gives you a stipend as a naval officer. You do officer training in the summers, which I did at various military installations in the summers of medical school. And then after graduating in 1992 from the Medical College of Wisconsin, I then served 7 more years as an active duty medical officer, did my training at Bethesda Naval Hospital in Washington, and was part of my operational tour was on the USS El Paso, went to Somalia in 93 as part of Operation Restore Hope. I was the physician on the USS El Paso, taking care of a little over 500 men, Navy and Marines, and came back to be chief resident at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And my last tour was as a physician to Congress, the Congressional Medical Clinic that takes care of the Supreme Court justices and House and Senate members, is a Navy clinic with an admiral and 2 internists, and I was honored to be one of those internists for 3 years.
Wow. So you got an opportunity to meet many of the members as patients, many of the members of Congress, Senate, and even Supreme Court.
I did. It was an unbelievable tour.
That's pretty amazing. Wow.
Yeah,
so,
we went on congressional delegations during NAFTA to South America, that they took a doctor with them, to Europe, and went to Bosnia and the Middle East, to Israel. Got to know Henry Waxman, John Moakley, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and many of them. So it was an honor to take care of them.
Okay. So then you finish your military service, and I believe you then you begin your private practice. Is that correct?
Yes. In 1999, it was a time to decide after 11 years in whether I'd stay in or my father was in practice in Phoenix, Arizona. His partner was on the verge of retirement. So I had just gotten married to the love of my life, got a Jasser now, and we decided that to settle down. And the military life, as much as I loved it, is tough. You're moving every 2 to 3 years, so the opportunity to work and practice with my father, settle down in Phoenix, was a opportunity that I took, and started a private practice in Phoenix, Arizona.
So you worked alongside your father in Phoenix, Arizona, began to build a private practice, and all this time you are doing all of the things we mentioned as a committed Muslim. Is that all true?
Absolutely. I was quite devout. I mean, if you go to Bethesda Naval Hospital, there's a crescent that was added to the Jewish tablets and the cross on the chapel there, that the admiral that runs the naval hospital at the time asked me and another, the head of the endocrine department, that actually was known because he had taken care of President Bush 41, and we added Muslim services to the Bethesda Naval program for Friday prayers at the whole complex there. So when I came out to Phoenix, I also helped in a mosque project, the first mosque in Scottsdale, Arizona. We were involved in the leadership there. So wherever I went, I was very involved in the Islamic Muslim community. I was taught by my parents early on that we could practice our faith more purely, more independently, more personally in America than we could in any of these Muslim majority countries that are run by dictatorships and theocracies and theocrats. And it was really part of what made me love America.
Okay, so you're this patriotic man, doctor, serving the Congress, the Senate, the Supreme Court of the United States, caring for the medical needs of these important individuals. And a committed Muslim. You're practicing your medicine. Your devotion to medicine is with your father in a private practice in Phoenix. And then what happens?
Then 9/11 happens, and I actually
changed.
At the time, the world changed. I woke up as everybody did on that Tuesday. It was 5:30 here in Arizona, and we saw the planes flying in, and just like the rest of the country put together that we were under attack. And the first thing I told my wife, and my parents was, and this is how I opened my book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam, was I wanted to sign back up and go get those bastards. I had just signed off my my officer's commission, and I thought, man, maybe I need to sign back up. And
so this is important. I want people to hear this. Your first instinct after you learned that the 9/11 attacks were the horrible, unspeakable, vile work of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda done in the name of Islam, your first instinct is, I want to rejoin and go get those bastards.
Yep. There's nothing that I feel we need to protect and cherish more than the freedoms that we have as human beings, and there's nothing that preserves those more than our government. And I felt a responsibility. I realized this is something that we knew. Every Muslim who's honest realizes that Al-Qaeda bin Laden, and now ISIS, and all of these permutations are natural offshoots and byproducts of interpretations of our religion that are byproducts of every Muslim majority country and its dictatorships, and a religion that needs to go through a reformation that it has not. And if we don't do it, nobody can. And there is a huge responsibility, I think, a religious and a national responsibility as Americans, that when we sit in this lap of freedom, that we do something about it. You can't, the folks in Syria are being slaughtered by their governments. We are not here. I'm sitting in a free society, and God is judging what I'm doing to fix this. And if I don't get up and rejoin to kill those bastards, which is what I said, or if I don't, begin to do things, and ultimately we decided that the best way for me to fight back is not by getting back in the military, but rather as an activist, as a reformer, to start fighting back against the ideas that are the underbelly of this militancy.
So you form at that point an organization dedicated to bringing your message of reform to Islam. What is the name of this organization, Doctor?
We called it American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and our mission was not to fight terrorism, which we felt was just one symptom, but to fight the systemic disease, which was to preserve freedom and liberty through the separation of mosque and state. And we felt that just as America was founded on its first freedom of religious liberty and the prevention of the establishment of religion, Islam and Muslims need to go through this process of realizing that every society that we live in, not only America, but and this is in 2003, long before we ever even thought that the Egyptian and Syrian and Libyan revolutions would ever happen. We thought that ultimately the ideas of freedom are the solution, but that has to come through a belief that theocracy, the medieval interpretations of Islam, especially its Sharia law, need to be defeated, and we need to do that here in America. And we thought that the legacy, our organization is about legacy, that the legacy we want to leave our kids is an Islam free of institutionalized Sharia or Islamic law.
So with the formation of this organization, off you go to become a voice. As a committed Muslim, you do not leave your faith, but you stand inside your faith, working for reformation of your faith. Is that true?
Absolutely. And this is why we call it the Islamic Forum for Democracy, because we realized, the impetus of the organization came on November 4th, 2001. 2 months after 9/11, the front page of the state paper had a piece that said, American Muslims torn between loyalty to America and loyalty to Islam. It was a 5,000-word piece by two reporters that they interviewed every imam in the city here in Phoenix, and they interviewed students, Muslim students, and every one of them was blaming Israel, conspiracy theories, was saying that the radicals were not radical because they were fighting American foreign policy. I was reading stuff with my jaw dropped, and I told my wife, we have a huge establishment problem. We have not only a leadership problem, but the normal Muslims are not organized. We don't have a brand to speak of. So we need to form organizations that they can fight.
So, Doctor, at that point in the story, 2 months after 9/11, you come to recognize that the terrorists are organized and the moderates or the mainstream are not organized. Is that true?
Yeah, and that the terrorists are basically drinking from the same substance, and that the distributors of the toxic intoxicant of political Islam, Islamism, the theocratic political collectivization of our community, were completely organized through the mosque network, etc. Now, they may condemn terrorism, they may condemn the acts of Al-Qaeda, but they didn't condemn the reasoning, the ideology. They just condemned the means. And the rest of us were sitting sort of not only on our hands, but not even realizing that this was our problem. And this is why we formed our organization. We listed a set of principles that was a firewall between us and them. The the number one principle was not only the defense of our Constitution, but the defense of the American military. The fact that we need secular governance to defeat Islamic states, that jihad cannot be defeated without defeating the identity of the Islamic State that tells Muslim citizens that their obligation is to participate in jihad, et cetera, et cetera. So, this movement needed to start. Now, it took another 10 years before we had the Muslim Reform movement that now is a diverse movement. But I'll tell you, 2 years after 9/11, we had a rally against terrorism at Patriot Square in Phoenix. And that's what launched our organization. We got national attention. We were criticized by many because there were only about 800 people that showed. But to us, that was huge because you took a community that was in complete denial, and we got probably at least half of them were Muslims that were at this rally to recognize that we needed to do something.
One of the things that most fascinates me about your thinking process, and I've told you this privately, is that you seem to, at least metaphorically, come at this issue, one of the grand issues of our time, on which, some might argue the survival of the world rests. You come at it as a medical doctor, talking about it as a disease with a kind of medical root. In other words, we know certain things contribute. For example, now modern medicine knows what contributes to the growth of cancer and what retards the growth of cancer. And you speak about the problem within Islam as a cancer. And I think that you have particular unique credibility as a medical doctor to talk that way. After all, you were a medical doctor taking care of the Supreme Court justices of the United States of America. So take the audience on a journey about the analogy of cancer as a medical doctor and what you see within Islam.
Well, I think the analogy is perfect. It's amazing how some of the Islamists who are in denial or trying to keep America from really figuring out what the problem is that would take away the power of the theocrats, which are groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations and others, but they will say that if a non-Muslim says that Islam has a cancer, they call that hate speech. When in fact, when I talk to my patients that have a lung cancer or a pancreatic tumor or a melanoma on the skin, they realize that if it spreads, they could die. But if they treat it early, if they treat it with all the vigor of life, and the cancer is then resolved in remission and then completely defeated, the patient survives and lives on to live a healthy life to see their grandkids. So faiths that are overcome and faith communities that are dominated by an establishment that are theocrats, in which men with beards tell women how to wear their dresses and tell them they have to wear a cover on their head and cut the hands of those who steal, all the other things that are seen in Iran and Saudi Arabia. For us to divorce that reality from the reality of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Hezbollah is completely absurd and in denial. And folks who are non-Muslim that deny that connection are enabling our intoxication with this cancer, if you will. So I think the analogy is perfect. And, people say that, well, you need to be an Islamic scholar to lead this movement. And I think history has shown that intellectuals, I'm not afraid of academics. As a physician, you look in history, whether it's Maimonides, Benjamin Rush, there have been a lot of leading physicians in history that have also been philosophers and intellectual theologians and others, and that in our training as physicians, we learn. I mean, William Osler, the father of internal medicine, taught early on, and something we teach every medical student. Most patients come through your door maybe with 10 symptoms, but usually one major disease. And that's so important to life, which is when you're looking at the malady of the Islamic world and Muslims, if you will, we might have education issues, economic issues, but typically the problem of radicalization is one disease. What is that? It is theocracy. Bin Laden wasn't poor. Baghdadi of ISIS is not a poor man without a job. This is a theological problem that needs a theological solution. And my medical training gives me the academic rigor, but also the understanding. By the way, I'm also a medical ethicist trained in ethical dilemmas. So, the issue is I see this as a problem that only we can solve, and we need to do it intellectually, but also honestly, and not try to blame 6 different things, but look at one solution as we're trained in medicine to do.
Okay. Doctor, you just said something very interesting. I've never heard you say it before. And, of course, I'm not a doctor, so I might not have heard this. When a patient comes in to see a doctor, they often have 10 presenting symptoms, but one central disease. Am I paraphrasing what you said accurately?
That's correct. The father of internal medicine, that's called Oslerian thinking, which is William Osler said that don't try to give patients 3 diagnoses. Rarely they might have more than one, but typically when they come in with complaints, it's one unifying diagnosis.
So if they come in with 3, 4, 5 different complaints or symptoms, the doctor's job is to try to look for the unifying cause, the disease, and that is what you have done in essence with your work. Now, another fascinating theory you put forth is as the 12-step analogy. Now, many Americans are familiar with the 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous and all of the other anonymous programs, Gamblers Anonymous, they're all based on the 12-step program. And you speak about the problems in Islam requiring a 12-step solution. So talk a little more about that. Also a very fascinating rhetorical analogy, I think.
Yeah, and it's not just sort of trying to fit a metaphor. It is so perfect, Michael, because we are a community. If you talk to Muslims, many of them say, well, that's over there, it's not my problem. Or they say, well, it's not, Islam is a religion of peace. Really? Well, why then every Muslim majority country is run by the most ruthless dictators on the planet? We have a problem. And the reason the 12-step program works, and it makes sense, is the first step is denial. Why has America spent so much time in this last election cycle arguing about, well, should we call it Islamic or not? You have the, Obama administration that refused to call it that, and now Trump is calling it. And yes, you won't win the war just by calling it that, but you stop the enabling. And how often do you see alcoholics who say the first step is an intervention, right? Our community needs an intervention. Somebody needs to sit down with Muslims and say, hold on a second, we love you, but we're going to give you tough love. And you need to admit, maybe you don't believe this, but you need to admit that your leadership, your clerics, are churning out ideas about Sharia law that are the conveyor belt towards radicalization. And once that intervention happens, the enabling will stop, and you get past the first step, which is denial. Muslims need to start getting angry, which is the next step, and then on until we start fixing and reforming the ideologies that are political Islam and theocracy.
Well, let me ask you this, Doctor. I haven't asked you this question privately, so I'll ask you publicly. Where we find ourselves today, right now, not 200 years ago, 500 years ago, in modern world today, currently, is Islam currently a religion of peace?
Well, it's interesting that the term comes from a oversimplification of even the word Islam. It's funny how even when you say Islam, the word salam means peace. Islam is derived from that, but actually I'll tell you, theologically, Muslims believe their soul is at peace when it submits to God. So the word Islam means to submit to God. So even those people that try to say that it's a religion of peace, it's even a twisted definition. I believe my faith is peaceful. Are we pacifists? Absolutely not. The Quran is full of just war passages and no different than the Old Testament and others. But the bottom line is the interpretations of the majority of Muslims across the planet is not peaceful. Is my Islam that I teach my kids peaceful? Absolutely. It's very American, I believe. But Would I leave my kids alone to the Islamic textbooks that are even on our own shelves to learn their faith? No. And that's something that I tell my wife every day, is that when I know that my kids can go pick up books from the establishment, the Islamic global establishment that teaches them a faith that isn't in contradiction to the U.S. Constitution and secular society and individual freedom, I'll know that our job is done and we've left a legacy of peace. Right now, that's not what the Sharia textbooks teach. It teaches kill the apostates. It teaches things that Muslims deny exist, because it's true. Most of us don't get our faith from a book, but we get it from our families. So, yeah, I reject those who say, well, Islam is a war religion, so therefore it can be reformed. No. Islam is what Muslims make of it. Most of us have reformed our faith by practice and by coming to countries like America and being free, but we're deluded and delusional if we think that the establishment of Islam is peaceful.
Doctor, to people listening to the show all throughout America and throughout the world, what can they do, one, to learn more about you and your organization? And then what advice would you have for them to assist you or help you in, if they're listening to this message right now and they are finding themselves walking around the room saying, yeah, right on, tell it like it is, Dr. Jasser, what can the average American do to assist you in bringing forth your message more clearly and loudly?
Well, we've developed a newsletter that's rolling out. It's called takebackislam.com. So I'd ask them to go to takebackislam.com and sign on and start to learn from the insider report of what I'm doing and what our reform movement, what our organizations are doing, just to sort of have their hand on the pulse of what I think is the most important part of this movement. But as you know, Michael, we can't do this alone. And if you wait for the Muslim community to do this, it's going to take too long. I think Americans, by virtue of understanding America and the secret sauce of this greatest democracy on the planet, I think get it and can understand it within this few minutes that we've talked. So I would ask them to not only sign on to our newsletter, but begin to talk to demand from media, government, universities, that they start to have these conversations of tough love with Muslims they know at the dinner tables, that interfaith conversations no longer just be about platitudes of what we share, but what they're doing to fix the theological discourse and differences between groups and communities, and that this war needs to be fought not just as a whack-a-mole program to fight terror groups abroad, but to expect the Muslim community, not through a bigotry of low expectations, but to expect them to lead reform. So do that in professional levels, to look for Muslim identity groups outside the mosque, be it lawyers, physicians, engineers, business folks at chambers of commerce, to engage Muslim communities and say, where are you? Do you know who Dr. Jasser is? Do you know who the American Islamic Forum for Democracy is? I'm sure every one of your listeners knows some Muslims in their communities.
What is your general?
Ask them if they're engaged.
Doctor, what is the general website for your organization? Not the newsletter, but there's just the general website. People are craving more information about you, what you're up to, who you are. Where would they go? Our website is
aifdemocracy.org.
One more time.
As in forum.
AIF.
AIF as in forum, democracy.org.
Oh, great. Okay. Doctor, an honor. As I said to our audience when we began this conversation, I know you personally. I admire you immensely. If people listening to this knew how many hours every day, every week, 7 days a week, every month, the sacrifices that you make to your medical practice, to your family, to your wife, to your children, to your personal life, it's an extraordinary effort. You are almost single-handedly changing, slowly but effectively, the conversation. I noted last year, I think it was 3 of the 17 Republican presidential candidates mentioned without prompting your name as one of the most important voices in the in responding to the horrible evil of Islamic terror in the world. So thank you, Doctor. It's a real honor, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. It's my pleasure. Appreciate it.
My name is Michael Levine. This is a show we refer to as Without Notes, the podcast dedicated to the lost art of long-form communication. Tonight, a fascinating conversation with a man who I believe 10 years from now will be regarded as a vitally important political and social thinker, leader, and let's hope to God he is successful in helping defeat the scourge of Islamic terrorism. My name is Michael Levine. We'll see you on the next show before long.